Hello and Assalamu alaikum everyone. I welcome you all to our today's session on air quality by Dr. Gabriel. Dr. Gabriel is a professor at the Purdue University Indianapolis, and he's also a research fellow in air quality. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Gabriel to open the session.
Well, thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum to my friends in Pakistan, and apparently Lala is in Bangkok. But regardless, it's very nice to see you all, and it's an honor to have an opportunity to share some time with you. And Sarah, should I just go ahead and start then?
Yes, Dr. Gabriel, please start with your session.
Fantastic. I'm going to share my screen. Is the screen viewable?
Yep.
Perfect. I've had the joy of being an air quality fellow for the embassies in Pakistan for 3 years now. And in that capacity, I've had a chance to come to Pakistan to speak and meet with colleagues in Karachi and Lahore and Islamabad. And I fell in love with Pakistan. The landscape and the people and the food are incredible, as you well know, because you live there. But of course, there are some downsides, which is that the air quality can be very poor at times. And much of Pakistan is also undergoing some of the challenges of climate change. Like most of the globe, however, the unique environment in Pakistan seems to make it a little bit more vulnerable. Obviously, we've all been undergoing challenges over the last year and a half with COVID. And I know that in many places we're a long way from coming out of that. But regardless, you've seen a couple things occur, I think, during COVID that really puts a very strong message to us as people about the issue of air quality. And I've had a chance to chat with colleagues from Pakistan over the last year and a half, and they related to me these stories of during the middle of the lockdown, the more extreme versions, these stories of the skies being clear again in a way that they'd not seen before, at least not for a very long time, and hearing birds in the city. And even some of my colleagues in the north seeing the mountains from their homes for the first time. And I think that speaks volumes to our ability as a society to improve air quality. We are not just victims of it, right? But many of our very own actions exacerbate air quality. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about not so much the sources. I will be happy to talk about some of that in a moment, because I know that some of you have already attended a master class that the embassy put on. So you guys, some of you might be masters already, and you might be teaching me some lessons at the end of this. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the drivers of air quality and its health impacts. But much of this is going to focus on how you frame the conversation about air quality in a way that it makes it impactful at the local level, at the community level. Because we have a lot of what we call agency to act at the local level. We have a lot of capacity to do so if we have the proper tools. So I'm going to talk about air quality, talk about building some of those tools, right? And then we'll open it up to an open and maybe more frank conversation about the realities that you might face there in Pakistan on air quality and working on these issues. Now, let me start off with this Air Quality Fellows Program. You might not know the global context for this, but the Department of State the U.S. Department of State has been committed to begin monitoring and helping countries improve environmental quality around the world. And one of the areas that has been focused on since about 2012, so almost 10 years now, has been on air quality. And this was in recognition that we had embassies and consulates in countries that have that suffer from very poor air quality. here's a map, for example, of one way to visualize this. This is very fine particulates. But you could see that of the globe, there are some areas that are in green, meaning the air quality is typically fine. But of course, there are vast areas where it is not. For example, from Africa all the way through the Middle East, Pakistan, of course, and Asia, and all the way to China. And in those areas, the U.S. State Department had two interests in mind. One of them is to get good science on air quality so that they can advise the U.S. Workers who might be working at embassies or consulates, or even U.S. visitors, on how to protect themselves should air poor, air quality be poor. And the second one, of course, is trying to engage with countries in helping them elevate their capacity to monitor air quality and improve air quality. This program started in China, and it's been extremely successful. Right now, you might not know this, but there are something like 40 air quality fellows that are partnered with embassies around the globe, advising on air quality issues and doing things like this, sharing at least some of our experience with local participants. And you can see that the embassies, some embassies, as I mentioned, had challenges with air quality, some did not. Those embassies that had some of the biggest concerns started installing what we call research grade monitors, so the very high quality monitors that they began installing on embassy sites. There are 4, as you might know, in Pakistan right now, in Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, and Peshawar. And those monitors run 24/7, providing information on air quality there and posting that information publicly for all to see. And it's a great background tool because one thing I can attest to, having worked with these monitors and visiting the sites there in Pakistan, is they are of the highest quality. So you can depend on them. Unfortunately, we don't have vast amounts of money, so there's only one monitor in each city. So one monitor in Karachi to measure the air quality of 25 million people or more, for example, is just simply not enough. So what we are working on is how to communicate from that one monitor a larger texture, a larger fabric of air quality across regions. And the reason why we know this is important, and you know this is important, is that air quality is not just irritating for people. Bad air causes lung disease, right, and asthma attacks, but it literally takes years off people's lives. This is from a recent report where you could see that there are some regions in the world that suffer the worst air, and they also suffer actual years loss of life. In Pakistan, it's estimated that something on the order of 1 or 1.5 years of life are lost from the average Pakistani due to bad air. And so it becomes a very gripping issue, right? And so for this reason, the State Department is really concerned about air quality in not only for its embassy sites, but around the globe. And for example, they post information like this. This is airnow.gov. You're welcome and free to join it right now if you'd like. And airnow.gov is the public face for all of the embassy air quality monitors. And we measure air quality in a number of ways, but people respond most to basically almost like a traffic light, a color indicator. So green is okay, yellow is a little bit poor in terms of air quality, and then orange and red gets to a level where it becomes unhealthy for people. Certainly orange is unhealthy for sensitive groups, those who already have lung issues, and the elderly and children. Why children, you say? They seem healthy. Well, children breathe a lot more than we do per body mass, so they're more burdened by bad air. And then, of course, it goes all the way to extremely unhealthy for everybody. And this is designed so that you can match your own personal behavior to the air quality. And I'll be coming back to this a little bit later. These are the devices. This is the one as it was being constructed on the embassy site in Karachi. These are the devices that do the monitoring. These are certain monitor sensors up top, and here's all the what we call the guts of the system. And again, they upload information to the airnow.gov site for sharing as you see, or for doing your own investigations. You might be interested to know that the data that's generated from this is of such high quality that researchers frequently publish papers based on it. It's a wonderful snapshot of papers, but I'm also quite aware that this one site in Karachi, or the one in Lahore, or the one in Islamabad certainly do not reflect the air quality across the entire city. Right? We know there's variations in a city. There's some areas where the air quality is worse and some better. And so for that reason, people have begun developing other ways to augment, to add to the current air quality monitor system and localize it, right? This is one example of a low-cost monitor. I should say low cost, but it's not no cost. So low cost is about $250 US. So it's not cheap for a normal person, right? But it is certainly probably within the grasp of some organizations, let's say universities or community centers or mosques, to purchase these kinds of things. And people then place them and register them on the site, and then you can visualize minute by minute air quality values down at the local level. So you can see it's quite dense in some areas in Europe. This is the Purple Air Network. I highlight that because the EPA has done, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has done analyses, and these monitors tend to be the best of the low-cost monitors in terms of reproducing the high-value ones, of course. But you can see some areas, there's a relatively dense array, for example, on the foothills of the Himalayas, but in some countries there's very few monitors. Pakistan is one of them with very few of these monitors. And here is actually, at the time that I took this screenshot was about 2 months ago. This is the only one. But they provide pretty rich information if you happen to be in the area of that monitor. This is the day-to-day variation in air quality. This happens to be a time you could see, this is March of this year, where during this 1 week interval or 6-day window, air quality in general was getting worse and worse. So that's regional air quality was getting worse and worse, right? And that's air that is likely over, I think this is in Punjab area, it's likely over or near there, the whole region. However, you can see these day-to-day variations in air quality, right? Some of this has to do with local changes in atmospheric circulation, so natural changes, right? Some of it are emission sources. So many of these daytime peaks in this area are because of motor vehicles. Many of you are quite aware that in terms of the particulates, there are several sources that are contributing to Pakistan's poor air quality. One of them is a low quality fuel that's burned in motor vehicles. One of them can be brick kilns, especially those that are poorly designed or not designed at all to capture the particulates. A third is, of course, from coal generations, from electrical generation. And a fourth is from stubble burning, agricultural stubble burning. I recognize there's regulations against it, but having been in Pakistan, I also saw it occurring, right? So this starts getting down, these monitors start getting down to the local level, right? This long-term trend here is a regional level, but these are local levels, and it speaks to your ability to control some of these factors. For example, these daily peaks are from combustion of gasoline and diesel. So from a lack of emission control vehicles there. So what's the takeaway? How do you find solutions to bad air, especially when you don't have a lot of monitors outside of the few that are present in a couple networks? PAKI, the Pakistan Air Quality Initiative, also is working on some of this monitoring, but again, it's relatively limited. So when you get your air quality monitor shows you a red light, right? Meaning it's very unhealthy. What do? Well, one solution for vulnerable populations is to have some kind of adequate warning system so that they can move into a cleaner air environment. What does that mean? It means indoors, often with air conditioning or some kind of portable air filtration, especially during the daytime. I showed you that that's when it happens to be worse in this case. But you know, that's not always available. Air filtration systems are expensive, and I recognize that they might be out of reach of many citizens. So the recommendation, this usual one, meaning get to an area with clean air, is maybe not actually even achievable for a lot of people. So another solution is to start thinking about local interventions. This is an area where communities have some level of control over. And that includes some kind of community scale detection and action to reduce waste burning, greening initiatives where trees are selectively planted and maintained as buffers along roadways, right, to filter out air from vehicles, particulates. They're somewhat effective. They're not 100% effective. Another might be educational resources to schools and community groups to help engage them talking about air quality. On this latter effort, you might even be thinking of connecting air pollution with some of the youth climate action groups. I know that they're active in Pakistan because I follow several of them on Twitter, and they're very vocal about environmental quality. And they are amazing, I think, champions in this front. And everything that affects climate change also affects air quality. So this is why air quality and climate can actually be brought a little bit closer together. And efforts to improve climate change, again, improve air quality. So what are the challenges? But all of these, I have to be honest, the top-down approach I have found does not work with these solutions, right? If you as an organization said, well, we want all of these things to happen and here's how they should happen, or me as a university researcher says the same thing, they are bound to fail. And the reason they fail is that we are not experts in the community. Each community has its own way of communicating, its own challenges, but also its own assets and resources, right? We're not the experts, they are the experts, right? And in order for any of these solutions to be maintained, for example, I've heard this story from Pakistan just recently. You plant a park of trees in this area to clean out the air, and the community was not informed about this initiative, and they actually use that park to recreate or do other things on, and they find out that the trees were cut down, and that's because the community wasn't engaged in the process. And then it causes a lot of anger. The people who plant the trees are very mad the community doesn't understand the solution. The community is very mad that they weren't part of the solution, right? So how do you build that? I only have a couple more slides because I want to have plenty of time for discussion. So how do you build up what I call a pathway to effective environmental health engagement? Well, first thing first, hear from communities. Listen to communities. Don't come into communities and tell them their problem. This is particularly obvious with air quality, right? I think most people in Pakistan don't need convincing that the air quality can sometimes be bad, but sometimes they need a little bit more education about the fact that they're not just victims of bad air, right? They actually are producing some of that air pollution within their own communities. And so they can be part of a local solution. So that's the kind of engagement when I work with communities, and I have an entire air quality network here in the United States. I hear from communities first. And that's given me a lot of great ideas about taking the next step. And I consider some of the next steps are, frankly, we need more science, because not in a given neighborhood, the air quality is not equal. Some areas in the neighborhood have significantly worse air more times than others. So we actually need more science behind this. And the way I built my own programs here in the US is to rely on those high quality air quality monitors. They have them also in the US. The State Department doesn't run them, but our Environmental Protection Agency does. So again, they operate 24/7. So rely on those for a certain background level. But again, even in the US, there's only one or two, even in very large cities. So these are consistent and accurate, but involve communities in some of these lower cost air sensors. And the way I've done that in Indianapolis is talk about air quality and let them volunteer where they would want to, where they think the worst air is, and volunteer to host some of these monitors. And that's fantastic, right? Because they're actually then part of the research process. I might then add a few more monitors in places they didn't choose because as a scientist, I also want other kinds of information. But in this sense, I'm not only serving the community needs, but I'm serving the scientific needs. And what this helps me to do is to increase the sensor network from one sensor, one high quality sensor, to 30 sensors around the city. Again, these lower cost sensors aren't of the quality, but they're good enough to help us identify local sources. In fact, we've done that in Indianapolis. We know that there are some particular streets that are the sources. And strangely, it's not the streets with the most cars. Our cars here in the US, we have frankly a higher grade fuel than in Pakistan, and we also have better emission standards. Trust me, we had Pakistan-style air quality problems in the past, but we kind of worked our way out of it. But right now, it's not the cars, it's the large trucks and the medium-sized trucks, which are the biggest sources, because they burn a different fuel. They burn diesel fuel, which causes a lot of particulate emission. So it helps us link back down to source identification. But here's the key. When I use this data, we don't just publish it in scientific papers. Yes, we do that, but we also make sure that we have reporting activities back to the community. And that's a promise to make sure our data is transparent and open to the communities. We use Purple Air Networks just because it's an easy platform for people and for us, but there are other networks to use. Also, it makes sure there's community inquiry. So we have community members and press and the newspapers and news stories contact us pretty often if they have a questions of why is my air bad here? Or in the United States, we have our National Day, the 4th of July, Independence Day, where there's a tremendous amount of fireworks that go off. Every evening, it's at 4th of July into the morning of the 5th, air quality gets worse, right? The particulate matter goes way up, and you could see that in our sensors in the community. And it's not only an interesting phenomenon, but it has some implications about where you should probably put these fireworks displays. Probably should not put them right upwind of areas that already have poor air, right? You should locate them sensibly. And that's what I mean when I then say it leads back to solutions across sectors. In this case, the city is now reconsidering where it does its firework display so that the worst of the particulate matter falls over farm fields instead of the city. And you might say, well, that's not good for the farm fields. Well, it doesn't end up affecting plant or plant quality very much, as opposed to its very strong impact on human health. And then, of course, you can't just make this happen once. We have a phrase called rinse and repeat. So do this process and make sure that you re-engage periodically with the community and hear what they're saying now. Maybe their story or their input has remained the same, but maybe they have brand new ideas to bring to the table that you can try to help implement. And I'm in the process of doing that right now with our air quality network, where we have another partner who says, you know, we love this, but we want to do monitoring for this other reason related to school health, school children health. And so we are now deploying another set of 10 monitors to help coordinate with them, with the school children, which, you know, it's always good to reach out and interact with school children. So I hope that this has been an adequate background. I didn't go into a lot of details about particulate matter or ozone or other air quality indicators, but I know that we have other experts here and we also have plenty of time. And I encourage you to reach out to me directly. Yes, I serve as the U.S. State Department's Air Quality Fellow, but I'm also a researcher who has deep ties to Pakistan. And I have another research project already in the Punjab region on air quality. And so I would like to engage with you however you want. There's my direct email. You can interact with me on Twitter. And beyond that, I'm going to head and stop sharing my screen and look forward to hearing from you all.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. That was a wonderful presentation, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and it was really enlightening how the air quality is deteriorating and how we should move on towards adding more towards the effective management, or making our people realize how their engagement can be very effective in controlling the air pollution and also improving the air quality. So now we'll move on towards the question and answer sessions. There's this question for you by Christian Khatri, and he wants to ask if there are any models to get localized information from centralized monitors, as he was facing a lot of issues when he was doing research in Dallas area.
Yes, I'm typing in the response now, but it depends on where you are. In the U.S., it is the U.S. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, which has outlinks, so it has links to the state monitors. The peculiar aspect about the way that U.S. monitors its air is that the monitoring is the responsibility of the states. So although you can reach it from the U.S. EPA site, it's the different state environmental management programs that actually house the data. And it tends to, it's transparent. It's not as easy to look at, believe it or not, as the State Department's global network, because different environmental management departments in the U.S. are designed their websites differently, of course. So it's not super sensible. In other countries, it's really a country by country basis. China has a network that you can log into. Unfortunately, it's all in Chinese, so it's difficult to see, but the data is not. I mean, most people you can interpret what the data looks like. So yeah, there's different networks. And I'm sorry, I realized that probably during that presentation, I was on presentation mode the whole time, and I didn't click the right share screen, so I apologize if you kept seeing my next screen, but at least it got you some, what we call a teaser. So let me see, Taimur has a comment. Yeah, so this expense issue is real, and you know, certainly we can all wear masks all of our lives. COVID has taught us to be a little bit more comfortable, but and masks are slightly effective against fine particulate matter. They're completely ineffective against ozone, which is another irritant in the lungs. So unless you get a very expensive mask, these you might have. COVID taught us a lot about mask technology, but there's these N95 masks which are more effective if they're fitted properly. And yeah, the challenge with this with catalytic converters, of course, that's fine, but it's a big challenge because the fuel that's burned there in Pakistan tends to be a higher sulfur fuel than is burned in most places, so it's naturally prone to create these fine particulates. So this is a challenge, right? That challenge cannot be easily overcome at the local level, but you can figure out some local solutions. For example, relocating roadways, or at least discouraging truck traffic on roadways right next to densely populated areas or schools, right? If you relocate the main hub of traffic, you improve air quality locally at least, right? And that is one local way you can get around this. I see Dr. Asif Khan has his hand up. Maybe I'll get his question directly, and then I'll come back to some of these other questions.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Gabe. It's wonderful to see you again. Just had a comment. Actually, in many parts of Pakistan, we also have a couple of other sources of air pollution. I would just like to add on to the list that you mentioned. For example, we have a problem of burning solid waste because there are no proper disposal mechanisms. Therefore, what happens in many parts of big cities, even in rural areas, is that they just lit fire to the solid waste, and that causes a lot of air pollution. Furans, dioxins, particulates, and many other gases are released into the air. And also, the second other contributing factor is the roadside dust, which are usually coarse particles, PM10, and they also cause a lot of problems, particularly during construction sites and construction phases when we have mega construction projects. That was just a comment. But thinking about the air problems in Pakistan, I think we do have legislation, but it needs to be enforced. And that is something which is partially lacking in Pakistan, unfortunately. So proper implementation of the regulations and then enforcement. And this is something which I personally observed during my 2018 exchange visit to the US. And I was very impressed with some of the standards, for example, in California, where they have world-class standards for emissions. And I was speaking to the Air Resources Board, to one of the board members, and they said that very often we just take the police to sites. That doesn't happen. People actually comply, and there is enforcement, and people are aware that they should not be contributing to air pollution, and therefore emission control is very important. So that's a second comment which I just wanted to make. But I really appreciate all the information that you've given in your presentation, and thank you very much for all the knowledge that you've shared. Thank you.
Thank you, Asif, my friend. It's nice to see you again. And yes, you brought out an example on a longer version of this talk. I do hold up California as a model to how to go from very poor air quality to very good air quality. And it all started in the city of Los Angeles. Los Angeles had very poor air because not only were there a lot of vehicle sources in that case, but there's also a mountain range behind it. So it trapped these particulates in the basin of Los Angeles. So much so that my wife remembers growing up as a kid and having school canceled. They were called smog days. So, you know, that was kind of an extreme version. But what California did was really clever, and they passed two regulations which changed the entire country of the United States. First regulation was requiring better grade fuel in the state of California. And the second regulation was that every vehicle has to be brought into a service station and checked with a monitor to be approved every 2 years, or you cannot drive the vehicle. It's against the law. You can't register the vehicle. And what that did was something really interesting. One is that it then required every vehicle in the state, obviously, to emit much less air pollution. But then it required every vehicle produced in the United States to change the way they made their cars to make them cleaner. And at the same time, they got better mileage, right? So because California is such a big car market, you couldn't make one car for Indiana and another car for California, right? You just make one car. And so they thought, well, okay, I guess we're just gonna make the one car and we're gonna do it to California standards. So one state drove the entire country's commerce. So thank you, Asif, that's an excellent point. To your other point, I'm glad you added some of those other details about the local sources as well.
Yes, so just to quickly add on to that, so that's a very good example that you've given, for example, the certificates that were issued to the vehicles. And the same happens in the United Kingdom. So I was there for 6 years, and every year we used to have an MOT test, which is a vehicle emissions test. And if you pass that test, then you can drive the vehicle on the roads. Otherwise, you cannot. You need to modify your engine. You need to improve the emissions. So if we can have these sorts of practices and measures taken in Pakistan, I think we can substantially improve air quality, particularly if we have certification, annual certification for vehicles for their emissions. And the last point which I would like to make, that recently, just 2 days ago, we installed two air quality monitors in Peshawar. These are the optical monitors, and they were donated by an organization. So gradually we'll build on the network. So the more monitors that we have throughout the city, the better picture that we'll have related to particulate matter particularly. So yes, we are improving our monitoring, and I strongly recommend to the government here that they should have a sustained funding on an annual basis for air monitoring, and then that is going to build on, and hopefully in the future we will be we will be able to predict the air quality through artificial intelligence. So thank you very much.
Wonderful to hear.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gabriel and Dr. Asif. That was a wonderful discussion, and I'd like to add something to that. Coming from a metropolitan city in Lahore, I've observed in the past few years that we are also experiencing smog regularly every September, October. And for the past 2 years in the Punjab government, there has been regulation which is implemented that all the brick kilns stop working for those typical months of the year. But unfortunately, as Dr. Asif said, that we do not have a strong regulatory authority which is going to enforce that legislation. Legislations are there, but they're not enforced. So yeah, I agree with you that we need that strong kind of enforcement, maybe where people are going to be fined or where their businesses have to put to some kind of stop before adding any more further air pollution to that. Okay, so there we have another question. Would you like to say something, Dr. Gabriel?
No, that's an excellent point. All of that is excellent. I did want to respond to my friend Muhammad's comment. Yes, there are. You can make your own air quality sensor, and I've seen them built on a technology called Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi is this little device. It's just a chip. It's a completely flexible chip, and you can add on different sensors to it. And a Raspberry Pi itself is only, I think, $40, which is still expensive, but nevertheless, it's less than these $250 monitors. And you can add different sensors on. It's a great thing for kids who are learning computers in school because you program it all yourself. And the programming is super simple. Having said that, unfortunately, the monitor, the devices, the sensors are not very accurate, or at least not an accurate enough grade that I would be comfortable using them for informing about health at all. So that's the challenge. There's some capacity, but I think there's still some challenges. So I have a couple hands up, Sarah. Do you want me to call them out, or would you like to?
Yeah, please go ahead. You can call them out.
Okay, Taimur Khan, you had your hand up earlier too.
Hi, Gabriel. This is Taimur from KPK, Pakistan. So I would like to add on this topic that my cousin's sister is currently working in KPK government. She has done master's in environmental sciences, and she is working in vehicle emission testing station in KPK. So they particularly issue the certification for 1 year for the cars who are causing the air pollution. So this was the thing that I would like to add on, that my sister is working in that department in KPK, Pakistan. They are working on this thing, on vehicle emission. Thank you.
Thank you, Taimur. I have an open question before I get to Ilya's question. There is the potential, of course, to slowly transform some of the vehicle fleet over to electric, right? And I'm talking about the one thing in particular, those scooters, those small little motorcycles. The electric version of those motorcycles are nearly the same price as the gasoline version of those motorcycles. And of course they emit nothing. Yes, they take electricity that maybe is produced from coal, but that's not such a concern locally. Have electric scooters been introduced in Pakistan? And if so, is their price point anywhere near normal gasoline vehicles?
Yep, those motorcycles were like introduced in last week by Imran Khan, and they were about the same price as the other ones, and they have a mileage about 80 kilometers in one charge, and they are up to 60 kilometers per hour.
Okay, so for certain uses, they are adequate. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. So yeah, and I'm sorry, that was not meant to be anything other than a question. So thanks for that information. Ilyas Hussein, please.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. Thank you for the talk. Although I missed a bit of it in the start because the internet connection at my place is not great. Anyways, you talked about electric vehicles and electric scooters. The problem with electric vehicles in Pakistan is that road infrastructure is not that great. The suspensions of the electric vehicle tends to be very low, and they are not suited for the kind of roads we have here in Pakistan. For example, I live in a place called Skardu, which is in the north of Pakistan. The terrain is mountainous, and we need vehicles which have like higher level of suspension so that it clears the road, you know. And this is true for almost every place in Pakistan. Even in the big cities like Islamabad, there are speed breakers and humps in all those places where electric vehicles are. And there was this famous article in Pakistan newspaper Dawn about like somebody bought an electric vehicle and then he couldn't drive it around because of the fact that it kept on, touching the road. My point, it was like, I just wanted to make a comment about the air quality situation in my place. I come from a place called Skardu, which is in north of Pakistan, and it's very famous for its beautiful peaks and all those scenic places, and a lot of tourists come to this area. But it turns to a very nightmarish kind of a place during the winter months, because we have this issue of non-availability of electricity, and that that creates a problem for the people in terms of the energy issues, and we don't have any other source of energy except for wood. So I just wanted to know, or I wanted to talk about the challenges of smog rising from the fact that we are burning so much wood during the winter months that if you climb a mountain in Skardu, and all those people who have come to Skardu and who live in Skardu, they can attest that we have like high mountains. I usually do this in the winter months. Whenever I climb a mountain, I can literally see a cloud kind of thing hovering above the entire city of Skardu. You just wanted to know that what can we do, because we have to live in this place. I can't escape from here. But what do you think is the best way to tackle this situation? Because I can't control people and I can't have them not burn wood. But what I can do is I can save my family and, the people I know from the adverse effects of this situation. Thank you.
Boy, I know. Thank you. That is a challenge. That is an extreme challenge. So we have, I'm going to give the U.S. context, but it doesn't even apply to your situation, right? The U.S. context is there are some municipalities. For example, you might have heard of a city called Salt Lake City. It's in the Utah, and it's surrounded by, it's a beautiful city, but it's surrounded by high mountains on all sides.
Yeah.
And they have
Olympics were held there.
Exactly. And they have the exact same problem. There's a tremendous amount of wood stoves for heat, not for electricity, but for heat. And not so much cooking either, but nevertheless, and there was so much smog, so much smoke from those that it did the exact same thing you just described in the Salt Lake City basin. And so they banned them. It's absolutely banned to have a wood burning stove in the city of in Salt Lake City, which is an extreme measure, and it doesn't sound like one that it can be applied in your case. So I have no answer for you, I'm sorry to say, other than in your case, you certainly have found the source apportionment part of that. And I know that there are better quality stoves that, at least to some extent, reduce particulate emissions, but I've not seen one that solves the problem completely. Although maybe that's that is certainly can be something that could be a a way to innovate, to inspire somebody to innovate, to design a better stove. Because the ones that have been used internationally are largely to control smoke from cooking inside the home. A lot of areas in Africa, for example, they use wood, just like you said, but it's for cooking inside the home. And that's where the particulates really accumulate, and they don't have great venting outside. So there's been a big revolution in better stove technology. But again, it might be out of range of people in your city.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. I don't see any more questions. Does anyone else want to ask anything or share anything with Dr. Gabriel?
Looks like my friend Asif.
Yeah, Dr. Asif has another question.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. So since nobody else has a question, I would take the liberty to carry on the discussion that we were having earlier. And Sarah actually raised a very important point in terms of the emissions from the brick kilns. I would just like to add on to that. Recently, the Punjab government, they announced that they had transformed all the straight line technology brick kilns to the zigzag technology. And this is what the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province is doing now. Just recently, about 10 days ago, the first brick kiln in Peshawar, it was transformed from straight line technology to zigzag technology. And now the provincial government is trying to promote that. And the benefit is that the emissions are reduced from about 50 to 60%. And we have fewer carbon emissions, fewer soot emissions. But at the same time, the other benefit is that because these brick kilns, they use coal, the coal quantity is also reduced because there is complete combustion taking place in the zigzag technology due to the blow of the air, and that actually improves the combustion process, and therefore we have reduction in the carbon monoxide emissions, because we know that carbon monoxide is reduced due to the incomplete combustion. And at the same time, there is a decrease of about 30 to 40% of coal consumption. So that's why, because there are these benefits associated with the zigzag technology, that is being promoted in Pakistan, and hopefully we will see that will reduce air pollution in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as well. These are small steps, but obviously we need investments for that. And the government can provide subsidies or easy loans to the owners of these brick kilns, because when you transform them from one technology to another, then obviously there's an associated cost. So I think if we can have these subsidies, and if many other measures are taken, then we will be able to substantially improve air quality. And it's a collective effort. Everybody needs to contribute to this. People, individuals, communities, governments, and hopefully we hope to see better air quality in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Asif. Yes, that's a great example of the going from source apportionment to solution, right? Source apportionment is just understanding what are the major emission sources of something, and certainly brick kilns are a big one, but there's, like you mentioned, there's a technology for that. Or as they say here, there's an app for that. But in this case, it's a technology, and it has that double benefit of reducing carbon monoxide, particularly the coal. I think that's a phenomenal success story, but as you mentioned, it costs money. And so I remember this even 2 years ago when I spent a couple of weeks in Pakistan. I had kind of thought that by now all of this would have already been transformed from straight line to zigzag. But I have seen that that's not the case, because I monitor your air quality pretty closely, and I can see that is simply not quite the case yet. Timur has a question. Is there a way that we can use that bad air for good? I wish. I can't really think of a way to do it. There's certainly, in terms of climate change, there's been some some push to develop something called carbon capture and sequestration technology, where you basically take a large coal burning power plant, and instead of emitting the particulates in the air and the carbon dioxide, you trap them and you liquefy the carbon dioxide. Nevertheless, those are extremely expensive, and we haven't seen a single case of them working consistently. So I think it's a pie in the sky technology for now, but nevertheless, I mentioned before, and I'm really passionate about this. Every climate solution is also a air quality solution. Asif just painted that picture beautifully. Big source in some regions, at least in Pakistan, are straight line brick kilns. There's a solution in place. You reduce coal consumption by 30 to 40%, which reduces CO2 emissions. Right? And I think it's these creative ways to tie the two together that you can also bring youth along, because youth have a passion for this. Many of you guys are young, but certainly younger than me, but have a passion for a more sustainable and nicer Pakistan in the future. You know, and of course, I read the headlines, and I know that you're not just burdened with bad air, but some catastrophic flooding recently, glacier melting, which is causing significant concern. So there's a lot of issues tied to climate change. But again, I think tying the two together is a very effective message even for the government. I don't claim to speak for your government or government interests, because it's your government, but nevertheless, it's worked in Europe and it's worked in the United States. I've seen it work even right here in Indiana, where kids demand climate action from mayors of cities and towns. And mayors have a hard time saying no to a group of kids saying, we want to be carbon neutral by 2030. You know, because it's hard to say no to a kid, especially when they bring passion and facts to the equation.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. I'd like to add something over here. It's very interesting to know the fact that our government, as well as all the engineering organizations which are directly responsible for combating this climate change, are involved. They're all working together in hand. I'm a civil engineer myself, so recently I've heard that Pakistan Engineering Council has made it mandatory for all the graduating engineers that whenever they are going to graduate with a nice research project, they must have to incorporate the 13 Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations. And one of them we all know is climate change and how we can bring about and combat climate change. And also regarding the brick kilns, I'd like to say that there should be innovation in construction industry too. With new innovation, we can also reduce the usage of the bricks in the construction. Or perhaps we'll be able to move on towards the incorporation of the materials which are already causing pollution, like plastic, solid waste. So that could be another solution to that. Okay, anyone else has any other question for Dr. Gabriel? I think no one else has any other question. Would you like to say anything else, Dr. Gabriel?
Just a word of thanks to you, Sarah, for moderating the session, and the whole PUAN group, and of course the State Department representatives who are on this call for supporting this effort. I love the opportunity to engage with local communities. And even though maybe of this hour, maybe you only came away with one or two sentences that you can do anything about, that's at least one or two sentences before the hour began. So I also appreciate you guys joining at dinner time. I see Dr. Asif is actually probably commuting somewhere or another. Maybe many of you guys are as well. So I enjoy that. I know the time was not convenient for you. I've given one of these PUAN talks when I was there in I think it was in Islamabad at the normal time. So I know this is an inconvenient time, but nevertheless, I appreciate your interest.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite Ms. Franco for the vote of thanks, please. Over to you, Ms. Franco.
That was such a great question, such a great session, Dr. Filippelli. Thank you so much. And thank you to Sarah for doing such a great job moderating. Sarah is part of a unique group of alumni who participated exclusively virtually this year in her exchange program. So we're hoping that in the future she'll be able to go to the United States. And as you know, you were here before and now you're participating virtually. So I hope that you get to come back to Pakistan as well. I want to thank our alumni for being so engaging too. It's so wonderful to have this space where you can, have a meeting of the minds and share ideas. I will have to say I did Google an image of a Raspberry Pi. So I learned something new. I really enjoyed that. We're really fortunate to have you as a U.S. Air Quality Fellow for the Department of State, and the fact that you get to have Pakistan in your portfolio, and it's something that you know very well. And you already recognize some of the participants today. And one takeaway that I have is that we can help change air quality, and that we don't have to be victims of it, and that we can all use our sense of agency and capacity to act at the local level and organize interventions thoughtfully by getting community buy-in and community input. So thank you for those takeaways. And I just want to thank the commitment of all the participants today, your overall commitment to improving air quality in Pakistan, to the Pakistan-U.S. Alumni Network, and to engaging sessions like this overall. So thank you all so very, very much.
Right before we leave, can we all put on our switch on our cameras and we can have a group photo, please?
Everyone is preparing their best look, Sarah.
Yeah. I am still waiting for Shahid, Ashraf.
Please go ahead.
Okay, you guys don't want to be part of the group photo?
Yeah, seems
Okay.
so.
Okay, then on the count of 3. 3, 2, 1.
Perfect. Can we take one more, please?
Yes, sure.
And if you guys can like do some gesture for this one, so that I can have 2 pictures, one serious one and one the fun one. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, the victory sign would be great. Loving your sign, Tamur. Thank you so much. Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Over to you.
Thank you so much, everyone, especially Dr. Gabriel, for taking out time and enlightening us with all your expertise and the information. Thank you so much for Ms. Franco for being a part of our discussion and being there for us. Thank you to all our alumni for being a part of this session. And I hope we are all taking with us a lot of great information, and also this kind of enthusiasm to help combat the air pollution, particularly in our country. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.